You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world tonight. We're going to look at the alchemy of the UFO agenda. We are living in strange times, and most certainly we have seen some strange things revealed within the past several days. Most notably, the release of the alleged UFO files by the Trump administration. Now, there's nothing overly earth-shattering in those releases that I have seen. It's all stuff that's been known throughout the auspices of ufology for many, many years. But there are some interesting new videos that have emerged showing some strange objects, and we must understand and acknowledge the release of various older documents and portions of documents previously released that now they added some of the more censored contents back to the bits that were blackened out in previous releases through FOIA and other places. So we have some interesting details have emerged about this whole UFO agenda, if you want to call it the agenda. But at the core of a lot of this, we must realize that there are psychological operations being undertaken surrounding this whole concept and precept. That's the important thing to understand here and to look at. They're not being forthright with what they've released. There are much deeper records of this stuff, I'm sure, within the auspices of the military-industrial complex and the years and decades of studying this phenomenon. And much of this still hasn't reached the public, and a lot of it has to do with psychological operations, and you're not going to hear an awful lot about that angle of it because they are most certainly utilizing this whole concept as a means of indoctrinating the minds of the masses into thinking in certain ways, and we have this whole alien agenda attached to this. They want you to believe in the concept of extraterrestrial aliens, and here's the thing, I don't know whether or not they exist for real. If they do, then likely we know very little about them. But there are those who claim to know some things about them, and most certainly maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't have the answers to all of it. But what I do know is this whole concept has been weaponized against the minds of the masses in a great many ways, and this has been going on for a mighty long time. And tonight we're going to trace some of that back, and we're going to look at the alchemy underlying this, because this goes beyond the mere technological aspects to this. There's a whole technique involved in this as well that goes with affecting the mass consciousness. So this is something that's been leveraged by those in positions of power, those dark occultists who run things in this world, against the masses to bring about certain types of synthesis in this world that they want to produce. They largely want to steer the public mind into accepting certain things, and maybe there's some truth to what they're presenting, and maybe there's not. I don't know. The preponderance of evidence suggests that there's a lot of manipulation that goes on surrounding this subject, and we may never know the full truth of what lies behind this phenomenon, or series of phenomena, if you want to call it that, because most certainly it's a mixed bag when it comes to the UFO topic. You have all sorts of things, whether they be visible technological machines in the sky, or whether they just be some type of anomalous phenomena, light aberrations, or things of that sort. We certainly see the full gamut of all of this reported in the various UFO cases. So there's a spiritual phenomenon that underlies much of it, but there's also a nuts and bolts technology at the heart of much of this. And it's all about steering the narrative. That's always what it's been about. They don't release the UFO files by accident. This is all a controlled and contrived release. They're letting certain information out at this time for some reason or another. And you could see all of the social engineering paradigms in the mainstream media surrounding this. Do you think it's a coincidence that Steven Spielberg is releasing a film called Disclosure Day on the 12th of June upcoming here? Do you think that's a coincidence? Do you think it's a coincidence that Bob Lazar has been front and center in the mainstream once again, And Dr. Stephen Greer's out there talking about stuff, and Trump is talking about these UFO files, and there's still rumored to be some type of a major news release around the anniversary of the Roswell event coming in July. So certainly we're sitting in that time frame right now where we're hearing about some unprecedented things in the realms of the mainstream media, the mainstream press, the mainstream acceptance of certain things. All of these ideas in the past have largely been discredited, ignored, and poo-pooed by the mainstream press. So now it's actually getting attention from them, and people are standing up and paying more attention. Even Congress has become quite vocal about this. There are a select few people in Congress that want to reveal a lot of this information. Most certainly there's been secret programs going on for a long time where they claim to be reverse engineering some of these technologies that they have allegedly found. So, what's the truth behind this? Are there extraterrestrials? Are there aliens? I don't necessarily have the answer to that. It seems to me that, yes, there are other intelligences that do exist in this universe, even acknowledged in the mainstream religious context of things. But what exactly are they? And how do we come to that conclusion? Well, we still don't really know the answers. Are there physical entities that exist on other planets out there? Or are these more of a spiritual type of intelligence or an interdimensional type intelligence? Or is it a combination of all of these things? I don't necessarily have the answers, but it seems to me the preponderance of evidence points to a combination of these different things actually being influential in the paradigm here. So we have these various connections across the board where we can see that there are perhaps some non-human intelligences that we need to acknowledge in some way. We don't necessarily understand what they are or who they are or where they actually come from to any great degree, but we can acknowledge there's something there. And in addition to this, we also have human developments that have gone on side by side with this that have been covered up and disguised by those who steer the social engineering programs. And that's the portion we're going to get into here tonight. We're going to be reading from a book by the great Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, titled Saucers, Swastikas, and Psyops, A History of Breakaway Civilization, Hidden Aerospace Technologies, and Psychological Operations. It's important to understand the psyop factor to all of this. This is what's heavily being leveraged right now. People are considering things now that just a short time ago they wouldn't consider in a serious way. So now we could see where they're shifting the conversation to. And they're shifting it to perhaps the acceptance of non-human intelligences. And this is something that has largely been looked at in the mainstream perspective as nonsensical or silly or unprovable or unfounded, something they would relegate to the auspices of mythology or fantasy or fiction or some such thing. But now there's people taking these things seriously into consideration, that perhaps there does exist some non-human intelligence that may be more advanced than us or smarter than us as human beings. Maybe there's something to that notion. But largely what's happened is this whole notion of this potentiality has been leveraged by those who seek power and control, and you will always, always, always find the occult at the very center of all of this stuff. No matter how many times I try to find otherwise, I always wind up there. Every time I explore any of these little rabbit trails, that's where you wind up, because it is ever present, and it's at the heart and soul of everything. So without further ado, let's get into the reading here from Dr. Farrell, whom I greatly respect in his academic presentations of these various subjects. Flying saucers, whether they originate on or off planet, present unique opportunities for the conduct of social engineering. Viewed in this way, the UFO represents both an alchemical technology and a technique. For one of the goals of alchemy has always been the transformation of man and his consciousness, and no one can doubt that the UFO has done just that. I'm going to pause for a moment here before we continue. I would say that's spot on. You see, this whole narrative right now, in real time, is transforming the way man sees himself in the universe, sees himself as his role in this place in which we live, the image that we have of ourselves. It's all about the transformation of the image. If you've been listening to this broadcast for any length of time, you know the importance of the image. The image is at the core of everything. It's all about the beginning phases of manifestation into physicality here in reality. If you change the image, you change the reality. That's most certainly what's been leveraged here. So this has all been captured upon by the social engineers of this world for the various purposes that they have in mind. And we can see, as we explore the depths of the UFO subject, we find more and more of these different types of ideas presented, now in the mainstream more so than ever before. You see, they've always had their foot in the door with the circles of ufology and with people interested in the subject. And don't get me wrong, there's real phenomena associated with this, things that can't be explained by our modern science or cannot be outright dismissed. There's real stuff going on. But it's all about the leveraging of this to affect the human mind to steer it in a certain direction. This is what's been done. Those who seek to benefit from having this unknown phenomenon circulating around have leveraged it against the masses to bring about changes in this world they want. It's all about changing that image, as I had said, but let's get back to the reading. No one has better appreciated this fact than the famous French scientist and ufologist Dr. Jacques Vallée. We're going to review his work with the purpose to extract principles indicative of the use of psychological operations and to detect, if possible, the ideology motivating this breakaway civilization who has leveraged these tropes against us in a type of social engineering fashion. Indeed, Vallée hints at some of the vast potential for the social engineering near the beginning of his book, Messengers of Deception, and he says, quote, "Visitors from outer space would be a convenient interlude. They would offer the space effort and all of its attendant industrial technology a new purpose in life. They would rescue Western civilization from its acute spiritual malaise. They would help transcend political emotions and pave the way to the unification of that enormous economic marketplace, planet Earth. Take these possibilities into consideration, and you will begin to understand why the idea of life in space is no longer a simple scientific speculation, but a social and political issue as well. Sensing this, the military authorities have tried to stay away from it as long as possible. So has the scientific community." End quote. That is from Jacques Vallée, and he couldn't be any more correct about this. He certainly is correct. It's become a social and political issue as well as just a scientific one. And those within the auspices of the military-industrial complex wanted to try to push this way of thinking about it on the back burner for a long time, simply so they could control the narrative and steer public opinion in this way. You see, it's all about the suppression of technologies associated with this phenomenon. That's what's at the core of all of this. They don't want people to have access to the things that are potentially possible through the use of the technologies that have been developed and have been explored and discovered through the study of UFOs and potentially reverse engineered craft that have crashed or been brought down by the military from either other civilizations and or intelligences or from other human developments. It's hard to say what's at the heart of all of it. There's a combination of different factors involved. But at any rate, let's get back to the reading here. It's well established that two prominent Nazi scientists, Hermann Oberth and Werner von Braun, spoke out in provocative terms about what they call the extraterrestrial presence in the post-war period, when it is clear that a case can be made that some of the advanced flying saucer technology that UFOs represented already existed in Nazi Germany. Moreover, we've pointed out that Dr. Oberth was clearly involved in the Bell Project, Die Glocke, if you want to research that a little bit further. Of course, this is a well-known thing. This is said to be some type of an anti-gravitic engine of some sort, and there's been a lot of speculation around Die Glocke, and a lot of this comes from the works of Witkowski and others out there who have chronicled this, the existence of this technology. And of course, Dr. Farrell here has chronicled it quite well as well. So we see there were clearly some developments that may relate to UFO technologies that were going on in Nazi Germany. Let's continue. In short, in the Nazis' case at least, these scientists were lying. And lying, it would appear to be a purpose. The purpose being to promote the idea of extraterrestrial life and to imply an extraterrestrial threat while simultaneously protecting advanced technology by managing the public perception of it. This is classic psychological warfare, ladies and gentlemen, and of course our government today does the same thing. They have a vested interest in you believing in extraterrestrials. That's why they've pushed this whole narrative the whole time. It's a carryover from some of the same things that were done in Nazi Germany. They pushed that agenda. They had developed some of these advanced technologies there, and they were secretly funding them and trying to figure out how to do certain things with them. So we have all of this being well documented in the Nazi saucer mythology. A lot of it's become mythologized in a sense, but there are real nuts and bolts things behind this whole mythology that's arisen now. And it's hard to really get to the crux of the truth as to what actually went on with some of these advanced technologies they were developing. But certainly they did have saucer programs, and they did have this Die Glocke. It's probably the most documented of these secret technologies they were developing, these wonder weapons as they were called. Die Glocke, the bell. And you may have heard a little bit about that if you're familiar with the UFO subject. If you're new to this, then you got a lot of catching up to do. A lot of this stuff has been out there in the UFO circles for a very, very long time. But now, it's actually getting a little bit more credence and consideration than it has in the past, as the mainstream is starting to accept that there may be some truths behind a lot of this stuff. So it's important that we discuss these things. But the important confluence of events here is the whole psychological factor behind much of it. We need to understand a few things about it. It's an agenda. And there is a sort of alchemical rendering of it going on. Let's continue. So, moreover, as we shall discover as we proceed here, the post-war Nazis were working hand in hand with the American corporate elites after the war, which the elites helped place the Nazis into power before the war. As we discovered in previous researches we've done, the post-war Nazi scheme to survive and eventually regain power focused precisely on reforging these relationships that they had previously had with various institutions here in America. And you could go back and look at the connections between the Bush family and Nazi Germany. You see, there's a whole big, long history there, and you could find that out there in the mainstream historical narrative of things. There was a funding going on from here in America that began to bring rise to power to the Nazis in Germany. It all happened. It's all recorded history. It's indisputable that this went on. But anyway, let's go ahead and we'll continue here. The consistent goals of this Anglo-American corporate and banking elite has been to forge a global new world order, a global corporate fascist state, and thus this elite would have strong incentive to pursue or acquiesce in social engineering itself. Moreover, as we observed previously here, this elite had already established funding of psychological warfare studies in the United States through the mechanisms of the Ford, Carnegie, and Rockefeller foundations, and thus had access to all the techniques that research discovered. Jacques Vallée, in pondering similar questions, comes to somewhat startling conclusions, namely that from the standpoint of social engineering, quote, this is from Jacques Vallée, it doesn't matter anymore whether flying saucers are real or not. It still matters to me, of course, as an individual scientist. I have often stated, and I still believe today, that UFOs are real and technological. When I say it doesn't matter whether they are real or not, I am speaking of their social impact. You can find scholars who will prove to you that the supernatural powers of Jesus Christ never existed. You can also find scholars who will prove to you that they did exist. Does it matter? Of course not. It only matters to the experts who have staked their academic reputations on either side of the argument. The effects of the belief in Jesus, the impact of the doctrine based on the story of his life and death, are real enough. Socially, historically, the consequences are beyond question. I claim that some of that same now applies to flying saucers because enough people believe in them, enough people believe that contact with them is possible, and enough people even believe that they have secretly achieved such contact, end quote. So I'm going to pause for a minute before we continue. So Jacques Vallée made the prescient statement here, it doesn't matter if they're real or not. Enough people believe in them now that it's had an influence in the greater social consciousness. Enough people believe in them now that in a sense that kind of makes them real, regardless of whether they are or not, or were or not. That's the whole point here. It's the effect on the human psyche that's the important part. See, that's one of the main things I tell people all the time. One point I can't emphasize enough to listeners is, it doesn't matter if you believe any of this stuff or not. It doesn't matter. What you need to understand is there are people in positions of power in this world that very much believe in some of these concepts, and the things they do to act upon their beliefs will affect all of us. So you better understand where it is they're coming from, what it is they believe, why and how they do the things they do. That's the important part of it. So you could say it's all nonsense, it's all fabrication, it's all made up, it's fiction. That could be your stance if you want. But what you need to understand is it has a very real influence on the reality around us. People believe in these things. Their beliefs in these things will manifest in a certain way and become a sort of reality when enough people believe in the concept. They make it into a reality of sorts. As an example of this, just look at the COVID scamdemic that was pulled off on us. How many people wholeheartedly believed in that and acted as if it was real, whether it was real or not? Like I said, it doesn't matter if it was real or not. Look at the effect that it had on public policy, on the real lives of people. Now, there are many that will still to this day say the whole thing was a scam, the whole thing was a fiction, it was made up from whole cloth, and it was a hoax and a fabrication. But there's also many people who became sick with something that corresponded to the symptoms they were describing. Well, and of course, I guess if every symptom possible is a symptom of this thing, I guess at some point you'll have that. But certainly, there are some real-world consequences that came about because of people's belief in this thing. It's the same thing going on here, but to perhaps a different degree. It's all about the effect it has on the unconscious human mind. Because you see, things that affect the unconscious human mind will subconsciously affect conscious behavior later. It's a very subtle way of doing things. It's all in how the social programmers of this world operate. Why do you think they use entertainment as a means to socially program the masses? That's most certainly one of the things they do. It's right in the word, entertainment. Enter, to go in, tain, to obtain or grab hold of, meant the mind. To go in and grab hold of the mind. That's why they use that as a primary vehicle to change people's beliefs and values, whether people realize it or not. It's something called narrative transportation. They use fiction to affect and influence the human mind and make them perceive and believe in things later on a conscious level. It implants the idea or the archetype in your unconscious mind, and your mind will subconsciously react to that and later affect your conscious behavior. This is one of the key elements to social engineering, and the UFO phenomenon has been used as a tool to get this done in unprecedented ways, because ultimately it's one of the ways in which they can alter your image of yourself and your place in this universe. And where does it start? With the image. As always, change the image, change the reality. That's what it's about. But let's get back to this. Note the resemblance in terms of the alchemical architecture of social engineering between UFOs and religion, a parallelism we have already encountered with the likes of George Adamski and other of the UFO contactee movement that happened back in the 1950s, and other early contactees. Indeed, the fact that the later alleged Nazi field propulsion saucers of the Hanabu class or type so closely resemble Adamski's, and the fact that there are clear parallels between Adamski's messages from ETs and the Nazi doctrine, and this indicates the profound possibility that the whole Adamski affair was one larger psychological operation, a possibility that increases dramatically when one recalls that Adamski's initial contacts were from the American military. Gonna pause for a moment here. You see, military intelligence and the intelligence agencies have always seemed to have some type of a stranglehold on the UFO phenomenon. Why is it that the study of this has to be filtered through the intelligence and or military apparatus? Now, I understand, okay, you could argue national defense implications and stuff like that all day long, but if these were really a real threat, if there was some extraterrestrial presence that wanted to eliminate mankind, they could have done so already by the things that we've seen with the technologies that they wield, if that is indeed what's going on. So you have to question, is that what's going on? I would largely say no, it's not. Maybe there is some type of a non-human intelligence present, but apparently they don't seem to have it in for us, because if they did, we'd have been gone already, just based upon what we've seen. But you see, there's a psychological operation, a psychological motif behind this that is very useful for the social engineers of this world. They have a ready-made scapegoat for when things go south in Aliens, the aliens did it, or the aliens made us do it. They have their ready-made scapegoat, plus they also have this element of the unknown. People fear the unknown, so they could leverage that fear factor, not just a clever television show name way back in the day, starring one Mr. Joe Rogan, by the way. So, at any rate, they will influence this fear factor to socially engineer people's behaviors. People have this relative fear of the unknown. They know this. They leverage this all the time. Let's get back to the reading here. What UFOs represent from the social engineering standpoint is a veritable mass conversion of the public and media elite, for the phenomenon serves as a vehicle for images that can be manipulated to promote belief systems tending to the long-term transformation of human society. To put it succinctly, UFOs represent for the psychological warfare specialist an alchemical technology to transmute mankind himself into a philosopher's stone of sorts. Gonna pause for a moment. It's all about changing the image of man. And there's an old Stanford Institute research study you could read called The Changing Images of Man to know more about what it is they're trying to shape into place through social engineering. This is a study that took place, if I'm not mistaken, in the early 1970s, had prominent figures like Joseph Campbell, who's known for his work on the hero's journey and mythology, and Margaret Mead, a known cyberneticist, very intelligent woman, and others in prominent academic circles at that time that were looking to understand how to cybernetically change the image of man. Cybernetics is a methodology, by the way, folks, for those who aren't following along. It's a scientific discipline that is all about whole systems control. That's what cybernetics is. It's not merely about robotics or anything like that. That's a part of it, but a very small part of it. Cybernetics is the science of whole systems control. So certainly, that's what they were hoping to achieve. This is also known as full-spectrum dominance, by the way, if you want to look at it from the militaristic perspective and vernacular. Whole systems control, full-spectrum dominance. That's what cybernetics as a science is all about. And it's also known as informatics and various other things at this point, too. They hide the buzzwords with other buzzwords. And certainly we see the application of this in social engineering. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. But let's continue here. UFOs and the social engineering of a new religion. There's a very close resemblance from this fellow Adamski from the 1950s, his messages from the extraterrestrials, to the components of a religion, an expectation of revelation, a magisterium appointed to deliver the message, and an implicit technological threat of impending apocalyptic judgment if humanity did not mend its ways and acquiesce to the ET's advice. I'm going to pause for a moment. If you've never looked up George Adamski, do so. Interesting fellow. He was involved in the early UFO contactee movement that emerged in the late 1940s through the early 1950s and went on well into the 1960s before a lot of it was largely discredited by mainstream sources. And they didn't really discredit it in a very proficient way. They just kind of sloughed it off as being little more than nonsense without doing any proper vetting of things. But this Adamski fellow had a very kind of sketchy background. He had connections to intelligence and things like that. So you have to wonder about the authenticity of some of his things. Plus, some of the photographs turned out to be very simple things that could be explained away. So a lot of that taking place began to discredit Adamski's testimony. And he disappeared into the background come the 1970s, and the whole ufology movement really didn't have the same kind of enthusiasm that it did back in the 1950s when there were all of these different waves of sightings going on. You see, we had all these different flaps throughout the course of the 1950s. It was a very interesting time for the UFO phenomenon. But after that, interest kind of died off, and they began to discredit people like Adamski. And the whole thing became kind of a very specialized topic that very few people were interested in. So it disappeared largely into the background. But at any rate, let's go ahead and continue our reading here. According to Jacques Vallée, there is more to this parallel to religion than meets the eye, for the specific parallels between the UFO phenomenon and religion and myth are quite detailed, suggesting again that the phenomenon is being manipulated precisely for the purpose of a transformation of the human psyche, both individual and social. It is being manipulated as a conditioning process, and Vallée adds to this. He says, quote, "The most clear result was that the phenomenon behaved like a conditioning process. The logic of conditioning uses absurdity and confusion to achieve its goal, while hiding its mechanism. There is similar structure in the UFO stories. I am beginning to perceive a coherent picture of the flying saucer phenomenon for the first time, now that I am pursuing the idea that UFOs may be a control system, and now that I am aware of their link to human consciousness, I still think there is a genuine technology at work here, causing the effects witnesses are describing, but I am not ready to jump to the conclusion that it is the technology of some kind of spacemen." End quote. That's directly from Dr. Jacques Vallée, and there are many who have issues with the way Vallée approached this. They say he was a Rosicrucian. They say he has connections to the different secret societies, and some would accuse him of being a social engineer himself. But I think these are valid points. He pointed out some useful information here. This really has value and merit to it. Whether you agree with his approach or not, whether you think he's controlled opposition or not, he gave you some valuable insights here. Real valuable insights. See, that's the nature of disinformation and those who you would call controlled opposition. They do give you legitimate information along with a handful of illegitimate information. That's how they keep the waters very muddied. That's how disinformation works. That way, when you hear legitimate information from other sources, you will discredit it because some of the other things they told you have been largely discredited. So when that happens, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's largely what happens in the social sphere of things with people every day. So if it doesn't align with your pre-existing worldview, you discount and discard any information, whether it be factual or not, when it can be proven that somebody told you faulty information. And everybody makes mistakes, so does that make somebody a purposeful disinformation agent? Not necessarily, but the disinformation that's given can be leveraged at any rate, or somebody's personal opinion can be leveraged for social engineering purposes. And this is the important thing to keep in mind, especially if you have somebody who's massively influential in a certain realm of academia, or influence, or culture, or social sphere, or political sphere. Their opinion oftentimes will be presented as a fact, and that's not necessarily the case. Then you wind up with revisionist history. This is how social engineering works, and it's all about changing the zeitgeist, changing the group consciousness, the collective consciousness of mankind, steering the public opinion. Let's continue. Vallée is alluding to the technique of polarization, of the deliberate obfuscation of data by the creation of two mutually opposed contexts by which to perceive and interpret it, thus conditioning a population. Going to pause for a moment. It's also called Hegelian dialectic. You control both sides of the argument, and you can steer people's opinions towards whatever center you want between those two vantage points. This is done all the time. Social Engineering 101. In this case, it is worth considering the stories of E.T. human contact in toto. As we saw with George Adamski and the early contactees, the ETs were essentially human, and the contacts themselves, notwithstanding the darker implications of their message, were fairly benign. Going to pause for a moment. Now, if you're not familiar with some of this early contactee movement and George Adamski and the others who were part of this, by and large, the extraterrestrials or the aliens, the off-worlders that they encountered, well, they looked very human. So, this is something that has changed through the course of the decades, and with the science fiction that has come forward in those decades. This is all about changing images once again. So the image of the extraterrestrial has also been altered in the minds of the masses through social engineering. Do you understand? Do you see what's going on? You see, in the early contactee movement time, it was assumed and it was thought of by most of them that the aliens looked very much human. That they were so much like humans you probably couldn't tell the difference. Now that has changed, hasn't it? Now we have all variety of different types of extraterrestrials. If you actually look in the ufology movement, you see all kinds of different cataloged things, and a lot of these are based on perhaps some fictionalized accounts. Maybe some are based on other things, people's experiences. But you find a lot of this throughout different occult phenomena as well. People's perceptions of things are based upon their own personal lens that they look at things through. So one person's experience with a, say, shadow creature or a demonic entity or something like that will be different than another person's. It's how they view them through this lens of observation they have through their own worldview that may alter what they perceive as the appearance of these things. At any rate, let's continue. During the 1970s and 80s, the ETs had morphed into robotic greys and reptilians, kidnapping their hapless victims and subjecting them to a variety of invasive procedures that can only be described from the human point of view, as a form of physical, if not psychological, torture. In both cases, however, a subtle meme is shared, namely that humanity is helpless, its technology outclassed, and it must submit to the guidance of an elite. In the case of the later abduction stories, it is even said on many occasions that the behavior of the ETs is not quite rationalizable from a human perspective, and ipso facto, their intellect and moral understanding must be as superior to us as we to animals. In any case, the meme remains the same, but throughout both types of contact, it is important to recall that polarization itself is a purely human technique of psychological operations. Going to pause for a moment. Now, this is the important precept to keep in mind. Like I said, there are other terms applied to this. The most commonly known is the Hegelian dialectic, where you control both sides of the argument in order to steer somebody somewhere towards the middle where you want them. They do this across the board with everything. That's why we have a two-party political system. That way they could steer you into whatever faction or belief system that they want that is most expedient to their particular political agenda at said time. Like right now, we are seeing a shift back towards the morality of the Christian ideology here in America. We have these people shifting more towards a right-wing perspective from a left-wing perspective, and they take these things to the extreme polarities in the political sphere of things. And that's how they steer these things back and forth. So they'll go extreme left in their radical ideologies, and then from there they'll swing back to the extreme right in their ideologies. And in so doing, they steer the people towards a path somewhere in the middle where it holds up their agenda the best at any particular time. And that's where we're at right now in the political sphere of things. But at any rate, we see how this has been utilized even within the UFO movement. You see, the aliens, they shape-changed all of a sudden from what they were originally perceived as human beings in the 1950s on now to where we have the Greys and the reptilians and all of these different notions that have emerged since that time, since the early contactee days. It's all political. It's all psychological. It's all a matter of this social engineering trope that goes on. So that being the case, we can see how this has been weaponized in certain ways against us. Now, Vallée states this point about the aggregate effect over time of the UFO contact stories with his customary directness, and he says, quote, "The social, political, and religious consequences of the experience are enormous if they are considered, not in the days or weeks following the sighting, but over the time span of a generation. Could it be that such effects are actually intended through some process of social conditioning? Could it be that both the believers and the skeptics are being manipulated? Is the public being deceived and led to false conclusions by someone who is using the UFO witnesses to propagate revolutionary new ideas?" End quote. Well, it would certainly seem that way, wouldn't it? Now, Vallée may have answered his own question here, where he says, quote, "I believe there is a machinery of mass manipulation behind the UFO phenomenon. It aims at social and political goals by diverting attention from some human problems and by providing a potential release for tensions caused by others. The contactees are a part of that machinery. They are helping to create a new form of belief, in expectation of actual contact among large parts of the public. In turn, this expectation makes millions of people hope for the imminent realization of that age-old dream, salvation from above, surrender to the greater power of some wise navigators of the cosmos. With the release of popular UFO movies, many people who previously were skeptics have begun to jump on this bandwagon from outer space. I wish them bon voyage. However, if you take the trouble to join me in the analysis of the modern UFO myths, you will see that human beings under the control of a strange force that is bending them in absurd ways, forcing them to play in a bizarre game of deception. This role may be very important if changing social conditions make it desirable to focus the attention of the public on the distant stars, while obsolete human institutions are wiped out and rebuilt in new ways. Are the manipulators in the final analysis nothing more than a group of humans who have mastered a very advanced form of power? End quote. So that's a great quote from Valet. That sums everything up in a nutshell. I think that's what's largely going on. There are human beings steering social agendas in this way. But I also think there are non-human intelligences, spiritual intelligences, guiding and directing that from the topmost levels down. It would certainly seem to be that's what's going on, and there's different reasons for this. Different ways we could view this whole context of things, but certainly this whole UFO phenomenon serves as a vehicle for socially engineering the masses. That's why they're doing this now. That's why we have a Spielberg film called Disclosure Day being announced and released here in June, and we have, of course, the release of these UFO files right now. We've been seeing all the things leading up to this, all the strange phenomena in the sky. Remember back to I think it was December 2024, going into early 2025, when they had all of those mystery drone sightings all across the East Coast here in the U.S. and other places around the world. Do you remember all of that? You see, it's all shaping up to the same thing. It's all the slow roll of this social engineering agenda to get people used to seeing strange things in the sky and perhaps attributing some of these weird phenomena to extraterrestrials. They want you to believe in the notion of aliens, of extraterrestrials, of physical alien beings not from this earth who may or may not exist. Doesn't matter whether they exist or not. This is the paradigm they're trying to set up for you. They want you to believe in these things. It's the same as, maybe, let's use an example that we could see in the real world. Have you ever seen a koala bear in real life up close? Now, these do exist, don't get me wrong, but we take it as a fact just because we know from outside sources who describe these to us that they exist. Not necessarily because we've seen one. Take another type of an animal that you may not have ever seen live in person, but you suspect they exist because you've seen photographs, you've heard people describe them, there's a lot of literature talking about them. Is it the same thing with these extraterrestrials or aliens? And how would we know? Could somebody else maybe present you with what they call a Bigfoot or some such thing? Well, that implies something different, because this is not something that's largely accepted as being a real thing by many people, right? Well, does it mean it doesn't exist? Look at the mountain gorilla as an example of that. For years and years and years, the mountain gorilla was in the same camp as Bigfoot. People didn't believe that it existed. Well, now we know for a fact that it does exist. Simply because many people haven't seen it. It was only a small group of people from a certain geological region that had seen and reported on this thing. So we also have the same types of reports throughout, especially here in North America, from the various American Indian tribes of giants, red-haired giants, existing here in America in the past. Well, this is also something that's largely only accepted as legend right now by the mainstream. But does it mean they didn't exist? Maybe they did. Who knows? But this is the kind of paradigm we have here. Doesn't matter whether it's real or not. It has a very real influence on the human mind. That's the important idea here. So let's get back to Dr. Farrell's thoughts on this. So he tells us, let me summarize my conclusions thus far. UFOs are real. They are physical devices used to affect human consciousness. They may not be from outer space. Their purpose may be to achieve social changes on this planet through a belief system that uses systematic manipulation of witnesses and contactees, covert use of various sects and cults, control of the channels through which the alleged space messages can make an impact on the public. Going to pause for a moment there. Those were Dr. Farrell's conclusions thus far that he has found in his many years of researching this topic. Now, does it mean that there's no such thing as space aliens? Certainly not. But it seems that the concerted effort we have right now in the mainstream press and the mainstream paradigm is a one of manipulation. It's trying to convince people of a certain thing being true that may or may not be true. It's all about affecting public opinion. With these conclusions, I wholeheartedly concur, for throughout many of his books on Nazi secret weapons, he's been at pains to show the terrestrial origins of the fantastic technology represented by their Bell project, at pains to reverse engineer the possible physics basis for it, and to show that they survived the war in a position secure and strong enough to continue that research independently of the victories Allied powers had. In short, the ET hypothesis is simply not necessary as an interpretive template by which to rationalize the Nazi achievements or the various UFOs we see reported in the skies now. You don't have to take the stretch to say that's an alien. What do we know? Let's look at things from a factual perspective here. You see an airplane in the sky. We know what airplanes are, only because we've been exposed to them in our lives and in our own experiences, by and large. But if you see something else in the sky that does not fit the description of an airplane, do you automatically assume that it's something other than a human that built it? There's human beings. We can build flying craft. We know this. This is applying the Occam's razor logic that these people so much like to lean upon for all of their different ideas that they express to us. So does it really stand to reason if you see something strange in the sky, a flying machine of sorts, that doesn't fit the archetype of anything you're familiar with, why would you automatically jump to the conclusion that it's got to be aliens or extraterrestrials? It's like looking up and saying, okay, there's a unicorn that built that. Unicorns built that. Replace the word alien with unicorn, and you get the idea. It sounds nonsensical, when the most logical conclusion you can reach, the Occam's razor method, is that a human being built that, or human beings built that, and are operating that. You wouldn't jump to the conclusion automatically without any other evidence that there was something else behind it. Now, there are anomalous things that we do see in the sky that we can't readily explain, but does that mean that they fall into this extraterrestrial category, as we've been so pressed with in recent years by the entertainment industry and by the mainstream scientific paradigm? There's so many things we don't know. There are lineages of technological advancements that have happened in secret for many, many decades now that we know very little or nothing about. These are black budget programs. They're called special access programs. The military-industrial complex is rife with these. Why do you think the Pentagon is missing trillions of dollars they can't account for? It goes into these programs. You're talking about all kinds of developments that have been made secretly, covertly, behind the scenes. And if you think they can't keep secrets, I think you're underestimating what they're capable of in that regard. There exists and has existed an agency in the United States military-industrial complex that nobody even knew existed for 30-plus years. Was founded in the 1960s, was never publicly disclosed to have existed or known to have existed until the 1990s. It's an organization called the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office. And this is largely where many a researcher has concluded that the secret space programs operate from. Maybe there's some modicum of truth to that, and maybe there's not. I don't have the answers to that. But the mere fact that the NRO existed for 30-plus years and nobody knew about it tells you they can keep secrets for that type of length of time. And then if you get compartmentalized programs involved wherein you subcontract out to private corporations, you can keep the secrecy about these things all the better. Because you see, right now there exists laws in the U.S. that are called Freedom of Information Act, and you can get certain information about certain programs with a request through that. But here's where they are able to actually skirt that law with a lot of this. If they subcontract out some of these programs to private corporations, it then becomes proprietary information and is not disclosable via FOIA, because you see, it's the private corporation that actually has all the cards in their hand at that point. And this has also worked against those within the auspices of the control structure of the development of these special access programs. They haven't been forthright in what they've discovered. They've become a breakaway civilization unto themselves. It's a type of intelligence community that exists outside the auspices of official government. They don't disclose to Congress the way they were supposed to. They don't disclose to the Pentagon the way they were supposed to. And these programs have now been discovered by people within Congress and by people within the other avenues of military intelligence. And much of this has been brought forward now. There's been talk about what they call the legacy program, or various legacy programs that exist that have been operating outside the oversight of the official government agencies that they were supposed to be working for. They've broken away and done their own thing and have kept many of their innovations hidden behind the wall of secrecy and national security and behind proprietary information. And all of this feeds further into this whole UFO agenda. You see, it's all part of the alchemy of this agenda. The alchemy is to affect the human mind and engineer a social change in the public consciousness. So we could see a lot of this has gone on, and here's some of what we can know as to what has arisen out of this whole UFO agenda. We have resemblances to mythologies. There's parallels between this Adamski fellow and the contactee mythos that went on at that time, and that of Western religion itself. Now, Jacques Vallée compiles a useful catalog of contactee beliefs. Now, remember, this is from Jacques Vallée, his exploration into the early contactee movement. This is what he found, and we'll find parallels today in the UFO culture. Vallée says, quote, "A catalog of contactee themes compiled from interviews that he conducted include the following. intellectual abdication, the widespread belief that human beings are incapable of solving their own problems, and that extraterrestrial intervention is imperative to save us in spite of ourselves. The danger in such a philosophy is that it makes its believers dependent on outside forces and discourages personal responsibility. Why should we worry about the problems around us if the gods from outer space are about to solve them? It also oftentimes relegates racist philosophy, according to Vallée here, the pernicious suggestion that some of us on Earth are of extraterrestrial descent and therefore constitute a higher race. The dangers inherent in this belief should be obvious to anybody who hasn't forgotten the genocides of World War II, executed on the premise that some races were somehow purer or better than others. Gonna pause for a moment here. Eugenics, and all of this smacks of the secret doctrine of the occult fraternities, too, that there are some races that are more spiritually evolved than others. It's the same kind of thing that goes on. Like I said, when you trace it back to its roots, you always find the occult. It's the same angle here in the UFO movement. So Vallée continues here, and he says to note in passing that Adamski's Venusian, the stranger of the Canigou seen by Bordar, and many other alleged extraterrestrials were all tall Aryan types with long blonde hair. Isn't that interesting? The next thing that this whole ideology promotes, according to Vallée, is technical impotence. The statement that the birth of civilization on this planet resulted not from the genius and ability of mankind, but from repeated assistance by higher beings. Archaeologists and anthropologists are constantly aware of the marvelous skill which the ancient engineers developed the tools of civilization on all continents. No appeal to superior powers is necessary to explain the achievements of early culture. The belief expressed by the contactees reveals a tragic lack of trust on their part in human ability. And I'm going to pause for a moment. And you also find this same ideology rampant in the old occult teachings of the secret schools, of the mystery schools, of the old fraternities. They say the same things, that mankind has largely been assisted by outside forces in its development and evolution through the course of time. It's part of the secret doctrine, folks. The UFO culture is just a spin on some of the same old things that have been present for years in occultism. Next, Vallée lists social utopia as another tenet of this. He says, fantastic economic theories, including the belief that a world economy can be created overnight and that democracy should be abolished in favor of utopian systems, usually dictatorial in their outlook. Going to pause for a moment here. So it's the same old New World Order, ladies and gentlemen, like I always tell you. That's what the end goal of all of this has always been. It's what it always is. With all of these different tropes and agendas that are foisted upon mankind, it's all about achieving their New World Order. Note that the themes of dictatorship, racial and technical superiority, and an off-planet origin for humanity from higher beings, and a social utopia would all be memes or ideas well in keeping with the ideology of both Nazism and, as we shall see here shortly, within certain circles of the American corporate and banking elite, particularly those represented by the Ford and Rockefeller dynasties. Gonna pause for a moment. Once again, you always have the same moneyed interests at the heart of a lot of this, too. And you know what? A lot of them have many of their roots within the secret society groups, the occult fraternities. Always the connection back to the occult. These are the ones who have a lot of financial influence and power in this world. And it's no accident. They all follow the same playbooks. And then we see here, Farrell adds to his conclusions here and to his observations. He says, To these, we may add the memes we discovered operative in the Adamski case. Now, this is going back to the early contactees, and you will find much the same today as far as the end goals and the various memes or tropes surrounding the UFO culture today. Number 1 is the meme of imminent revelation or disclosure. That couldn't be more obvious right now, could it, ladies and gentlemen? And number 2, the meme of conversion. For example, the claim of some to have had a special Damascus Road revelation, a la St. Paul, with extraterrestrials, and thus to constitute themselves part of a magisterium of illumination and truth, whose statements are to be taken on faith in the authority of their personal experience, as opposed to the outside world of skepticism and non-belief. Stephen Greer. You see how all these same players steer the narratives? It's the same memes and tropes to steer and socially engineer the masses that has been there from the very beginning with this whole thing. The last point cannot be pondered too long, for it is the standard technique of the 3 great Yahwehisms, or the 3 great monotheisms, which came by claims of special revelation coupled with the judicious application of force and terror, in other words, by dint of psychological warfare operation to supplant the older philosophy of the cultures around them. In short, this is according to Farrell, the 3 great Yahwehisms produced the same precise results of these later contactee revelations. Now, he ascribes the same things that are happening with this UFO culture today to the 3 major monotheistic religions in the world, the Abrahamic religions. And that's not to say these religions are bad in and of themselves. It's the way in which they have been used as a social engineering tool against the masses that he's pointing out here. This has happened in the past. It's happening right now. It's even happening with the mainline religions today. It's happening with a lot of other ideologies today, the UFO one being present as well. So these are the precise results that were garnered by the contactee movement and have been achieved by religious fervor, by the manipulation and use of religion as a shield to protect those social engineers who sought to change the world into the image they want. It's the same old thing going on. Number 1, a social schism between truth and error, or believer and infidel, or in the case of contactees, believers and skeptics. Number 2, the requirement of a revelation to enforce the status of the former, and therefore, number 3, an incipient introduction of unending conflict between the 2 groups, and thus, number 4, the fulfillment of a utopian or messianic expectation sometime in the future. Gonna pause for a moment there. Same old New World Order, ladies and gentlemen. The tools are the same. The techniques are the same. It's the same old alchemy being leveraged against the human mind. But the outer facade looks different than what it used to. Anyway, Farrell goes on to say that Vallée is alive to the fact that there are 2 parallels between religion in the proper sense and contacteeism, for in his view, the Mormon religion would be today viewed as precisely as a contactee phenomenon. Succinctly stated, a mere physics approach to the UFO phenomenon is inadequate, for the phenomenon encompasses wider aspects of social, alchemical transformation. Going to pause for a moment. That is the proper assessment to make about this. It's not about the technological aspect to it. Now, don't get me wrong. There can be some very important discoveries made due to the technological aspect of this, and there can be some really fundamental changes made due to the use of the technology, but that's not what they're looking to use it for. You see, they have no interest in giving you free energy. That's the problem. It could be completely transformative of the world. It would change the world from a model of scarcity to a model of abundance, and they do not want that because that threatens their grasp on power. The people who are controlling the narrative, the social engineers, those elitist class in this world who steer and run things. They don't want to give up power. They don't want to give up control. They don't want you to have access to the same things that they do. Plain and simple. If we can get to the root of what it is that is present within these UFO technologies, for lack of better terminology to describe it, at the heart of all of it is the most important thing of all. It's about accessing free energy. They don't want you to have that, because if free energy were introduced to everyone on Earth overnight, the world economy would collapse. All of their systems would collapse catastrophically. What's the most traded commodity in the world? Petroleum. Oil. That would go away overnight if we had access to free energy. They would lose their grasp on power. That's why they're being so careful about how they disclose some of these ideas. They would much rather for you to believe that these are extraterrestrial technologies, that human beings have no way to achieve such things. We don't know how it works. We could never know how it works. It's so far advanced of what we could possibly conceive of that we can't make it work. We don't know what to do with it. We don't know how it would work. They would prefer you believe that than to know that in this breakaway civilization, they know how to make this stuff work, and that there's a clear lineage of development of these technologies going back to Nikola Tesla and possibly before him. They've learned some things, some science they've pursued in secret, and they keep us occupied with a model of physics and reality that is not the way things actually work, but it is a mathematical reification that they can use as a framework to help them achieve certain desired goals, although they know at the core that it's not an accurate description of anything. It's just a way to plug numbers into a system and make a simulation thereof so they can make predictions based upon that. Doesn't accurately reflect how things really work, but yet they push this as mainstream science, this atomistic approach to it. Everything is a fundamental particle in this approach. But behind the scenes, in secret, they pursue a different model of physics in the development of these technologies. And they will scarcely acknowledge this, because to do so would open the floodgates for people with some understanding and some experimental skills to perhaps develop certain things on their own that they don't want developed, that they've kept hidden. So they'll tell you all of this stuff is nonsense. They would like for you to believe that either UFOs or flying saucer technology is a fiction, or it's extraterrestrial and it's advanced far beyond what humans can understand, and we don't know how it works, and we've never been able to grasp hold of how it works. We can't possibly do anything with it. It works like magic. That's another thing. They would like you to believe that magic is nonsense, when there's a clear delineation through the course of time that there are certain magical procedures that work. They may not understand why it works or how it works, but it does indeed work, and this is recorded in grimoires and various things throughout the course of time as well. It's all a system that relates to this off-the-books physics as well. It all relates to harmonics. These types of ideas, frequency, vibration, all that stuff that they've turned into New Age hokum. You see, they want you to think it's all silly and nonsense. They've weaponized it against you. Same thing here. They don't want you to understand that something like this could potentially be achievable by human beings. You could have free energy. You could have abundance. They could solve all kinds of problems with this. But will they? No, because the problem is those who've obtained these positions of power and influence in this world, they don't want to give up that power or influence for the betterment of mankind. That's what a lot of this is about with this whole UFO agenda. It's the alchemical transmutation of the world mind. They want you trapped in this eighth sphere reality they're building. It's a trap. It's a trap for your soul, for your mind, for your body. The hyper-materialist paradigm, they want you stuck there. They want you to believe there's nothing else. There's no spiritual realms beyond this. There's nothing beyond this physical manifestation that we see with our five senses and experience with our five senses. This is all there is. That's what they want you to be vested in. That's the transhumanist future that they're looking for. It's the eighth sphere, as Rudolf Steiner described it. The Hermeticists describe it as the world of shells. It's a world devoid of spirit. It's dead entities. It's corporation, the very definition of corporation. Corporation, the root word is corpse, a dead entity. We live in a world of legal fictions. That's what your name in all capital letters on your driver's license represents. It's a legal fiction. It's a straw man identity. It's a dead entity. This world is run by a death cult that want to maintain their power over the masses. And they're using this UFO agenda in the modern parlance to do so. They've weaponized this trope against us, and now they're using it because the interest is at an all-time high for this topic. That's why they're doing these controlled releases of information. It's always controlled. Always controlled. Now, don't get me wrong. Every once in a while, there is a leak that comes out, but the vast majority of them are controlled leaks. But they don't want you to understand the depths of how far this goes or the reasons why they want to control the narrative in this way. And they steer social opinion, public opinion, through the use of the means of this. And at the end of the day, this whole UFO push, this disclosure push, is all part and parcel of the same thing going on. It's all about social engineering. That's the important thing we could take away from all of this. It's not important whether or not UFOs or extraterrestrials or aliens or spiritual entities, non-human intelligences, any of that stuff. It's not about whether it exists or not. That's immaterial. The problem is people are interested in that ideology and that way of thinking, and there's nothing wrong with being interested and curious about it and wanting to know more about it. What I'm telling you, and what seems to be the preponderance of evidence here, is that you're not going to get any of that, because it's all about social engineering. They've leveraged the whole topic as a means to engineer the masses into accepting certain paradigms. It's controlling your perception of reality, ladies and gentlemen. That is what they are seeking to do, and that's why you see, even though there's a real phenomenon associated with this, they're controlling the output of information and narratives around it to control you on an unconscious level. And most don't see through that paradigm. But I'm here to tell you, we need to be mindful of that. You need to know if they're talking, they're lying. That's as simple as that. If they're talking, they're lying. Because they are manipulators. They want to steer your opinion and your worldview in a certain direction. They want to change the image of man and the image of the universe itself. And they want to put themselves at the apex of that universe as the new gods of this place. These people controlling the information. That's all about the alchemy of the UFO agenda. It is a type of alchemy. It's the transforming of the human mind. That's what they're seeking to do. That's what the ultimate goal is behind this UFO disclosure program that is going on right now. We've seen all the lead-ups to this. You see, they slowly acclimate the public mindset to accepting a lot of this. And like I said, it's not a coincidence that Steven Spielberg has that new Disclosure Day movie coming out on 6/12. That's right, June 12th, 2026. Or 666, if you want to break it down numerologically. Now, a lot of people would say that's a coincidence. No, it's not a coincidence. All of these things always seem to align in those ways as well. They always have their fingerprint on it. These occult fraternities and these social engineers of this world. You see, they leverage occult principles against you all the time. You just don't know how they work, because they've kept you ignorant of it, or made you believe that a lot of these ideologies and these ways of doing things are hokum and nonsense. That's why they gave us the New Age movement. They wanted to make it all look ridiculous. They know certain things work, though, and they use them all the time. They leverage energetic principles, the position of planets and stars in the sky, right down to numbers used and associated with things, and the language associated with things. It's all a manipulation tool to those social controllers. But as I said, you could relegate all of this off to coincidence if you want. I don't have enough faith to be a coincidence theorist, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think it's a coincidence that we have this major release from a major Hollywood name, Spielberg, on that specific date, and the release date was altered on that for some reason or another. It was originally supposed to air this month in May, but they changed it to 6/12. Makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes with that. Why would they change the release date on this? And what else is going to be surrounding all of this? And of course we had the release of these UFO files. Official acknowledgement of this for the first time by governments of the world. Of course, this all became public a couple years back when David Grush testified before Congress about the existence of UFO reverse engineering programs and things about it like that. But of course, nobody was really paying attention then, but they're paying attention now. Like I said, the interest in this is at an all-time high. So they're going to leverage the social engineering aspects of this to the utmost right now. And that's exactly what they're doing. And they've been leading the unconscious minds of the masses towards this for a very long time now. Thus, we have all of this pre-planning. The release of this Spielberg movie around this time is just one element surrounding that. Like I said, you could look back to late 2024 and early 2025 when we had those mystery drones going on all the time throughout the skies. Think about all of that. It's the slow lead up to this. It's planned. It's engineered. It's the very definition of social engineering. And now the time is right for them to give you a soft disclosure of sorts, and that's exactly what they've done, and this soft disclosure will be all there is. They're not going to reveal to you anything that's going to be earth-shattering within the next couple of months. They want you to believe that something earth-shattering will be there. They'll try to convince you of it. But it's not going to be anything other than rhetoric. That's the important thing to understand. They may come out and announce, yes, extraterrestrials are real, and here they are, and they'll show you them on television, maybe. But will you ever encounter one in real life? Probably not. Do they exist? Maybe, maybe not. But they'll put that seed in your mind with it. And they'll use their rhetoric to steer the conversation and to socially engineer your unconscious mind into acceptance of it. That's how it works. Once the seed is there, then it begins to manifest in a real-world way, and it will affect your reality from then on, whether such thing exists or not. You will act as if it does. It will be accepted publicly that it does. Much like the whole COVID scam they pulled on the world. Think about it. It's transformed our society, hasn't it? It's changed the way the world works. This is exactly what I'm talking about. That is social engineering to its utmost that has been leveraged against us. Think about what they could do with this whole alien narrative to such an effect. It's the alchemy of the UFO agenda. Anyway, folks, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I'll remind you I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now.